has been a real joy for me because it's been an eye-opening situation for me to understand the depth of this particular issue. I'm happy to say that we have some very, very wonderful speakers here tonight with us, some who have been in some of the previous webinars, but we want to welcome them back for tonight. We have Dr. Gary Rule. Dr. Rule is a Jamaican-born, Connecticut-based physician with internal medicine, healthcare consultant, a public health practitioner, and an author known for his work in mental health advocacy, community leadership, and healthcare management, notably leading Harvard's flood compensation program and serving as trustee for Wheeler Health. He holds an MD, an MPH, Johns Hopkins, and an MBA at Wharton, and focuses on reducing mental health stigma, improving care, and addressing health disparities. Thank you for coming back, Dr. Rule. Love having you here with us. We also have Nakia Miller, who's an LCSW, who earned her Bachelor of Arts in Psychology from the College of Holy Cross in 2003. She held her certification as an alcohol and drug counselor through the Department of Public Health. She obtained her Master's of Social Work degree from Springfield College, a license as an alcohol and drug counselor until 2015, when she transitioned toward clinical practice. In 2022, she achieved her license as a clinical social worker, and she currently serves as a clinical supervisor guiding MSSWs, LPCAs on their path to independence to licensing. She's earning a master's in fine arts degree in creative nonfiction writing at Bay Path University in 2019. And no, not 2014. And she has incorporated the arts into her practice, which is entitled Lemons to Lavender Therapeutic Work. Welcome, Nakia, again. And we also have with us a Dr. Heather Lawson, who is the board chair of our organization. Dr. Lawson holds a PhD and is also an attorney and with MPH. So welcome, Dr. Lawson. And of course, we have Maurice McDonald with us, a UConn intern that's working with our organization, who has done a marvelous job throughout the webinars that we've had and some other work as well, the flyers and stuff that went out to the community. Thank you, Maurice, for coming back and being with us today. So we've been talking about problem gambling in our community for, I think this is our fourth webinar, third and fourth. And we've looked at the history of gambling in the Black and Brown community. We've talked about how it presents itself in the brain. I don't think we did very much on treatment for such an addiction. We've talked about how invasive this problem gambling is, and it's everywhere, and it's in every generation. I think we need to kind of go over again about how, if we can, combat this, which it doesn't look like we can. It looks like this is a part of society, and we're not going to be able to remove it because it's almost in every facet of what we do. But how can we manage it? So, Dr. Rule, I'm going to start with you.
Thank you, Ms. Kelly, for that introduction, and thanks for having this conversation again. You raise a great point. I mean, I think that when I think about gambling addiction, I think about it in a broader context of just health, mental health, physical health, and some of the things that we deal with in our society. And because gambling is so pervasive, I think we can't really address it unless we really come at it from really all angles. I guess I'd kind of say that way. Mm-hmm. And it really has to do with trauma, some historical things that happens to us, is still happening to us, some physical health issues that we have, our environment, and really just disparities in general that our community has historically faced. So when I think about this specific issue, I don't see it in isolation. I think we need to address some other issues as well. And I will kind of just stop to just say that. The way to actually make a difference is to look at the root causes and to be sure that even for the individual who comes into seeking support and treatment, that once they come to us, we don't look at the problem in isolation. We really kind of just think about broadly, why they're there, what has happened to them, what has happened to their communities, and work with them to kind of think through what's the best path to approach it, but really to do it on an individual basis, but also like you've done here, to address the community. It really starts with a conversation, right? And my big thing about mental health and mental health conditions is just dealing with the stigma in period, just to recognize it and to know that we can make a difference and to address it. So I kind of skirted the issue, but I guess I would just kind of say that it's just not an isolated problem issue, I would say.
So you mentioned the word stigma, and stigma denotes that it is frowned on by society. Frowned on. I don't think it's being frowned on too much. I mean, I think it's been pretty much embraced as a part of how we live today. So how would someone actually, well, other than going broke each week from gambling, how would someone actually know that this is something that needs to be fixed, since society is not really saying that there's a problem? As a matter of fact, they're promoting it more and more. So how do we?
You're right. So I look at it on a spectrum. So gambling really is pervasive, from just the raffle that we do, the bake sale, sports betting. It's really kind of pervasive. But really kind of what happens is you then get trapped where just that activity becomes problematic, either because, so we're talking about problem gambling, right? It's where it becomes a problem, either because it's damaging your relationships, your work, your faith, your finances, you're getting into legal trouble, and you're becoming so obsessed with that activity, that's really all that you're doing. Right. So I'm not saying that just because I'm in church or with my faith-based community and I do the raffle, that's problematic, right? Or if you do that one-time sports betting with your buddies, that's probably okay. But it's problematic when, as an adolescent, that's all you're doing. You pick up your phone and 24/7, that's all you're doing. That's all you're doing online, to the detriment of everything else. And you're older, and that's all you're doing is spending your entire paycheck on lotto, online, in the casino. That's problematic. And it's affecting your relationships, it's affecting your health. That's why it's a problem. And that really is a stigma, because when it becomes to that issue, that's where the stigma comes in. And if you tell people that you have this problem, stigma then goes into discrimination, where they kind of they treat you differently because you're asking them for money, your relationships are damaged. So it's really along a spectrum, I guess, to answer your question.
If I could jump in just quickly and sort of dovetail on what Dr. Rule is saying. First of all, I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you all tonight. This is such an important conversation. But when you asked the question, you initially talked about addiction. And so I think that's an important place to start, because what I've observed is that some young people don't really perceive gambling as a risky behavior, right? They see it, particularly young people in communities of color, they look at it as a strategy, as a hustle, as a form of entrepreneurship. The perception shift is important for us to really talk about when we're talking about prevention, because I think we need to also talk about economic identity. And so when young people grow up in environments where wealth feels accessible, gambling can look like the only visible path to winning. And so I think that's important to throw into the mix as we're talking about how to tackle this issue.
Yeah, I think you're correct. I think it's been made to look so much for young people like just pleasurable pastime, that perhaps before they recognize that it's a problem, or even if they do recognize it's a problem, they're well into it. Nakia, you're a practicing therapist. What are you seeing? Are you seeing people come in for gambling addiction at all?
I am. However, in our community, it seems to be masked because there are so many other issues happening at the same time, and the reward that comes with gambling isn't a top priority. And that's why, if we could break it into these three categories. So we have prevention, where we're helping people understand not only the dangers of gambling, but what can enhance a gambling addiction. And as Brother Lovejoy mentioned in part 2, helping our people connect to their purpose so that this is less of a possibility. And then active addiction, which involves an actual treatment, therapeutic interventions to help adjust. But you still have the recovery period. So once someone is no longer engaging in the behavior, what are the additional supports that they need so that they don't re-engage in the cycle? And right now, given the difficulties, the state of affairs of our country, we don't necessarily know where we're going to land. We know our people are out of work increasingly, but we don't know what the next steps in our culture are going to be during this current administration. And that can be scary. Gambling can be a quick fix. You don't know when your addiction is going to kick in. It just happens. It goes from problematic behavior to addictive behavior. And that's a very difficult transition because it happens so subtly that some people don't realize they're in the throes of addiction until all of the evidence is present. I no longer have a job. My spouse is divorcing me. My bank accounts are zero, and so are my spouses. I'm homeless. So any support has to really have this kind of holistic viewpoint. And that's why I do believe that if we could look at prevention, addiction, and the recovery process, and ensure that any services that are working with our people are connecting with the possibility of gambling addiction, that we might get ahead of it, similar to the, say no to drugs campaign. Say no to roadblocks if we need to. Say no to things that require our children, if they're playing a game, they have to get the reward. They have to do the risk, get the reward, do the risk, get the reward repetitively, and spend money, time, and energy to do it.
Let me ask you, just to kind of give a little bit more information. What does treatment look like?
So that depends on what actual modality you use. I like attachment-based therapies. It's rooted in John Bowlby's work, where you look at what are your secure attachments? How do you attach to your caregivers? And how does that build your self-esteem and your view of self in the world and when you're alone? And then if something like gambling addiction interrupts your ability to feel secure, then actually allowing yourself to find new connections. And in the therapeutic model, you first connect with the therapist, build that trust, and then get to experiment with connecting with things outside of the therapeutic environment that actually feed you back, not temporarily, not just in the moment, but consistently feed you back and can be a part of your life ongoing, not for this short 2-minute span.
Okay, so I don't know if I understand. I'm thinking prevention, treatment. You put a little bell on me, and every time I want to bet on something, the bell goes off. Is there medication? If I'm the addict, and I say I have a problem, and I trust you, okay, how does that transfer over to me correcting the problem? You're saying this is a problem because you're broke all the time, you don't have money to feed the kids. Well, I knew that all along, but how do you turn the switch in the head? Because the facts are already there. I'm broke, I can't feed the kids, I didn't pay last month's rent. But how do you turn the switch? It's almost like, well, it's not like eating, but how do you turn?
No, it is. Yes, it is. It is. Addiction, whether gambling or otherwise, remember, it exists within the survival pathway, which is similar to what people call the reward pathway of the brain.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interpreted as this necessity. It's interpreted as this thing that brings reward above all the pain that it brings. In the way that right. So
I get that. I get that. But how all of that? I'm the addict. All of that sounds good. I understand, but how do I start to adjust and stop gambling when it's everywhere?
And it is everywhere. It's in every commercial. It is everywhere. It starts with commitment. It starts with willingness. And unfortunately, it takes a lot more than just tenacity.
Right.
It really does. It takes family support. It takes moving the enabler, right, along in the therapeutic process. And when we talk about treatment, we're talking about, equine assisted psychotherapy, showing up every week, regulating the nervous system, understanding that I can regulate my nervous system without gambling, and practicing that regularly until that switch kind of takes place. However, studies show that prior to death, people still have the desire. It's the ability and willingness to fight. And that takes a lot of work in the very beginning of treatment.
Dr. Rule.
Right. So thank you for that. So every condition that we talk about, right, every situation, there is a spectrum, right? So you start from 0, and then you get to where you actually are addicted, right? So the prevention strategies are different from a treatment strategies. A prevention strategy to prevent a young person from getting involved with gambling really has to do with a couple of things. Awareness of what it is, the consequences of what that being addicted might be. And then really, most times when people are becoming sucked into any type of issue, they're treating something else. They're treating a childhood trauma, an adult trauma, an anxiety, a depression, a PTSD. They're treating something else. So it's not like today I just do one gambling and then the next day I'm an addict. It doesn't happen like that. Just like with, say, diabetes, for example. It's not like one day I'm completely normal, my blood sugar is normal, and the next day I'm diabetic and my blood sugar is 500. It's a pattern. It's something that we're doing that will respond to some stimulus in our environment to get us to that point. And it happens over time, either because we're treating something, anxiety, trauma, stress, PTSD. We're not exercising, we're not physically active, we're basically sedentary. And you go from being not diabetic one day to 10 years from now, you're diabetic. Or even when like smoking, you start with one cigarette and you keep on smoking because it's treating something else as you smoke, and a year from now you're completely addicted. So I would think about addiction the same way. The prevention work is what we're doing now, educating, informing, making sure that our youth understand there's some circumstances that we have that other persons may not have, to understand the trauma you've been through, to be sure that when you're being pulled in, you're not doing that because you're bored, have nothing else to do, you feel like your life has no purpose, and you kind of get sucked in, to replace it with something else. And based upon that, versus somebody who's gone to addiction and they need something else, like the doctors have talked about, an intervention, cognitive behavioral therapy, equine therapy. There are many, many things we can talk about that would do it. So prevention is different from someone who really needs treatment.
Okay. I see that we have Brother Lovejoy on. I'm glad you got those technical problems worked out. Happy to have you. Thank you for coming back. So I guess you've been able to hear some of this. We're talking about prevention, which it seems like you can't prevent this stuff because it's not going to go away. As a matter of fact, it's just in its early stages of ramping up. But I know that you work with, how should I say, young men who you are changing their minds.
That's good.
And okay, and I'm gonna let you, kind of elaborate on that and how that could be a beginning for treatment, prevention, and all the rest that we've been talking about.
Yeah, actually, I was really enjoying the discussion, and I really had to get my technicals fixed, because I want to join the conversation. It's interesting when we talk about prevention. I think it's much more difficult today than it has been in the past, because of things like our cell phones and so forth. Young people are being exposed to video games and games of chance, as the Honorable Elijah Muhammad would put it, the games of chance that lure them into this gambling space. I mentor some young men who are predominantly between 7th grade and 12th grade. And when they come to work for me, they make money. They do, right? And, I always tell them to be smart with their money, right? And so I think in terms of the prevention method that we use is to help them understand, right, who they are, what their purpose is, and to try to keep them on track with that purpose. As I was, listening to some of the panelists, and man, there was some really deep commentary and research. I could hear it, but I'm looking for the point that says a person is missing something in his or her life, and they fill that void with gambling. They fill that void with taking chances. No judgment, not at all. Because in the world that we live in, where our identities have been stripped away, and this is Black History Month, so we're gonna be extra Afrocentric this month right here, if you will, right? Our identities have been taken, and I think to some degree, gambling and taking chances replaces the lack of identity. So my prevention method, if you will, with my young people is to keep them connected, not only to who they are, but whose they are.
So that's a whole different situation, because we've been under the gun with that for a while. It's interesting you put it that way. I was speaking with someone earlier this week, and I said, we're losing so much of our culture. So much of our culture. And it's almost, I fear that at some point we're going to be nomads. We're not going to be connected to anything because we're losing so much. And then all of these pervasive kinds of things can attack. What's interesting to me, what Dr. Rule said, is that gambling could possibly be sitting on something else.
Mm-hmm.
And this something else could be childhood trauma or some other kind of disorder. And so I think it really takes a therapist to get to that disorder, if in fact that's the case. So how do you know if this is sitting on something else and you need to attack that and not the gambling? Or is this just straight up, this is something that you started, you're perfectly fine everywhere else, but this just got a hook in you? How do you know, as a therapist, Nakia, Dr. Rule, how do you know that there's something else there and this is not the cause and effect? This is a symptom and not the cause.
Before we go to the clinicians, can I add a public health perspective, please? Because I need to hear what the clinicians have to say as well, because we learn so much from them. But I think it's really important to couch things in a broader perspective, and public health is my background. And so I think, as and this is a conversation that's ongoing, of course. And so right now we're talking about the individual nature of it. But I think as we discuss it, it's very important to situate gambling behavior within a whole range of environmental and personal and interpersonal exposures, right? We have to look at chronic stress exposure. We need to look at economic instability. We need to look at trauma load. I think if we only treat gambling
Behaviors.
as an individual addiction issue, we miss the broader structural issues. And so that sort of dovetails on what Mr. Lovejoy was talking about in terms of looking at who you are and whose you are, right? We have to situate this issue in a broader perspective. And that's just me coming from my public health background.
Okay. Somebody grab that. What do you think?
So when someone initiates a treatment appointment, a therapeutic appointment, that first session is, at that point, you do what's called a biopsychosocial evaluation. So you're finding out the possibility of all these contributing factors as well as barriers to treatment, not just the person came in because they're struggling with gambling. That gives you a snapshot of what other factors either contributed to their addiction and or what barriers to recovering from that addiction are present in their life and community at the time. Mm-hmm. So as you work through creating a treatment plan, engaging in that, what we call therapeutic techniques, to help move them along into the recovery process, you have a snapshot of that. And as they get to know you, it builds. Then you find out maybe they had some parental issues. Maybe at some point they felt they lacked somewhere. Maybe this does fill a void. However, I've worked with several people who never felt that they lacked until the addiction took place.
Okay.
And I will say that they seem to be outside of the statistic. People who grew up comfortable, had great relationships with their parents, never been bullied, never been assaulted, just feels they had a lovely upbringing. And they went to the casino with some friends for a 21st birthday, had a great time, but it was different from that for them than it was for their friends. So that takes a little longer to figure out, was something present. And those, few, there was no lack present in advance, But for the rest, as far as it pertains to our community, there seems to be this sense of growing up in lack and not wanting to lack anymore. And gambling becomes this opportunity to no longer lack, or at least to look as if you no longer lack. And I know I've already referred back to Brother Lovejoy, but going back to that idea of if we could be more consistent in our efforts to allow access to purpose for our children, specifically for our children that don't have adults in their life that can help feed that. If we as a community can help feed that at a lower cost, an affordable cost, and then having that, again, second phase of if there is an active addiction there, to have resources there to support them into the recovery phase. However, this looks very different because it causes homelessness. It causes a financial lack that our country just isn't prepared to help them with. For example, and I think I said this in part 2, but if you are on something like Section 8 and you now have to prove where all that money went, you don't have Section 8 anymore. Using the money for gambling does not mean that you have a low enough income to get this level of Section 8 or this level of state or government funding. You just don't. And now there are no supports left to help this family. And we then become the people who have to catch them.
So I'm glad to see Chef Jay with us. Thank you, Chef, for coming.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask you about something in a minute, because we talked again against what Brother Lovejoy talked about last time was purpose, and you got 3 boys.
3 boys, yes.
God bless you, child. I want you to speak to that, but I want to ask, once we do that, I want to ask Dr. Rule, is there an addictive gene that could be in people? It's just genealogy, and we'll come back to that. So, Chef, what do you think? What do you think?
Well, I think that my youngest son wants to apologize and for making me a little bit tardy. So thank you very much for your understanding. Those diapers don't change themselves. And but okay, so I feel like we're all in a way sort of adding on and paying homage to what Brother Lovejoy says. Every one of these sessions is such great content and such great commentary. And it's really insightful. One of the things I was thinking about when the therapist was talking was, does anybody, and this is an honest question I'll put out to the group, does anybody think that there's a difference clinically or socially, at least, the socialization of gambling in like a sweepstakes or a slot machine versus poker, where you feel like you have some sort of control over the output versus where you clearly don't, right? Even in the lottery, people feel like they have a certain influence over the input, right? I dreamed these numbers last night. My auntie, right before she passed, gave me these numbers, or I saw this number in a piece of toast or something like that, right? And you feel like you have an input over the outcome versus something where you don't, where you can apply your skills and apply your talent versus where it's just sort of luck of the draw. So I just want to kind of ask the therapist and the other professionals in the room whether they thought that was there was any clinical or socialization difference between those two when it comes to our topic. I had a conversation with my son about gambling earlier today. My oldest son, the Kalshi app, right? And it was, it's just fascinating to kind of listen to your kids talk, rather than trying to impose my thought process. I just sort of listen to him talk. And my son's, everybody lacks, I think, and I can certainly understand what the previous speaker was saying, but I think it's almost as simple as boredom sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's almost like you're gonna get like it almost felt like when I was talking to my son, gambling on Kalshi or playing a video game, whichever one sort of gave him the dopamine fix he needed.
Mm.
Right? It was like it wasn't. It was sort of like on par with other things. And now the output is different. You know, you can definitely lose your house. You can, you know, lose your car payment, lose your Section 8, as somebody else said. But when I was talking to him, I just sort of listened to him talk, and it wasn't necessarily about lack, it or anything like that. And this particular, or you know, socially feeling downtrodden or anything like that. It was just like boredom, and you know, and I guess maybe I'll come with a more practical approach here. Schools aren't even handing out homework like they used to. Like you know, I don't know if anybody else has noticed that, you know, as a parent, but like, you know, when I was a kid, I had ample homework to do when I got home. I had chores to do when I got home. There were things that I was doing when I got home that, you know, I had basketball, I had football. Um, I think the kids are leading a more sedentary life as well. So when we talk about gambling, it also fills a space. It's interesting. It's fun. It's quirky. It's got bells and whistles. Quite literally, it's linked to socialization with your other friends who are also getting in on the action. It's sort of the same thing as playing an online video game in that way. So just listening to my kid, I think that, you know, and I think that it would be the same thing for the 14-year-old. The 18-month-old is not there yet. Thank goodness. But I also think it's, so I would say my addition to this conversation would be keeping our kids occupied. And that's sort of similar to a lot of other things that we're talking about, whether it be building a community center to keep the kids off the street. I think a lot of the interventions we would use to keep gun violence or drug use or sexual activity away from the kids before they're ready for it, those same interventions might actually work for gambling in some cases. And I don't know if it would work for every child because people gamble for different reasons.
Right.
But that's
So
okay.
one of the kids who come to the barn often, always there, young guy, 15 years old, growing a mustache. I don't understand. In my day, you had to be 50 years old before you got a mustache. This kid is 15, he's got a mustache. I don't know what this is all about. So I said to him, I said, well, how come you didn't go to school today? He said, well, I took a mental health day. I'm like, what are you talking about? You took a mental health day. He said, my school says
Yep.
I could take a mental health day. So I took a mental health day. I'm like, is something wrong? He said, no, I just decided I was going to take a mental health day. And they said, fine. And they want me to take a mental health day. I'm saying to myself, my God. I said, well, I tell you what, ain't no mental health day here. Go back there and clean somebody's stall. Maybe when you say the schools are not producing, you know, one thing that I know for sure, and I'll say this, and I've said this for years, we do things that schools don't do. You know, when I went to school was just a few years ago. We used to dissect frogs. They don't do that anymore. And we've done operations on chickens and roosters and some other animals, as our chairwoman would say, and some most stuff. Schools don't even do that anymore. And one of the things that we hold dear is that when kids leave the barn, they are stinky and tired, and they go home and eat and maybe do their homework and go to bed.
Go to sleep. Yeah.
It's something because they have had it. Maurice, you had your hand up. What do you think?
Yeah, what you just talked about and what Chef Jay talked about it's called a third space. Children have been lacking third spaces. That's a space that's not school, that's not somewhere you're required to be. They're lacking that because of issues around funding and decline and like safety concerns. People are concerned about putting their children in like certain after school programs. So to speak to the boredom piece and its like relation to gambling, if there are more third spaces like the boys group or the girls group at Ebony Horsewomen, and there will be a decrease in phone use and interactions with online gambling systems, and more having access to those apps and kind of using your boredom to kind of just gamble or stay or scroll or whatnot. So I think if we increase the third space of space that is entirely voluntary and is in its entirety for entertainment purposes, then we will
Mhm.
kind of decrease the boredom and the isolation and that screen dependence that leads to uh, gambling.
So thank you, Maurice, for that. That third space, that's another concept that I'm going to remember. I'm reading something that Brother Lovejoy put in the chat, and he said that in many BIPOC communities, gambling isn't just a disorder, it's a survival strategy shaped by limited options. Now, I'm going to take issue with that because, you know, I live in the past. We had none of this stuff these kids had today. When we got home from school, we had chores to do, and you better get them done before your parents came in. Chores to do, and if we had a chance to scoot around the living room a little bit with Soul Train or whatever, we got a little bit of that done. And what we wanted to do most was to get away from our parents, because every time they looked at us, they had something for us to do. So I don't understand. You know, you talk about limited options. You go back in the backyard and get you some marbles and you roll them across the dirt and you play marbles or something. We ain't had none of this stuff this kids have. So speak to that, Brother Lovejoy.
Yes, ma'am. I think that, you know, and I totally agree with you. I listened to my mother, and you know, she talked about her upbringing in Georgia, and I would say that, you know, my generation, being a young 58, about to be 59-year-old, was probably the last generation, that last group that got the final essence of what came up from the South. And so while young people today have more things, they have more things, what they're lacking is the essence of family. And so young people today they don't even understand the historical connotations of redlining and restricted home ownership. They don't understand the unemployment discrimination and limited income mobility that we came up with. They don't understand the wealth gap that still persists today across generations. They don't understand the traditional wealth building pathways that were blocked and how high risk alternative became psychologically appealing. They don't know what's going on behind the curtain. So they have more things, but they have less substance.
Mm-hmm.
Are there differences between the young kid from Simsbury or Avon or Fairfield County or Greenwich and the kid from the north end of Hartford? You know, they're both gambling. You know, I wonder if I wonder about that. You know, I don't know. It's a really good question. I'm posing it to the group as a question. Is there a difference? I mean, there are clearly kids who come from a lot of money, very well-to-do backgrounds. Mom and dad are still together. You know, they've got soccer practice, and it's a definitely a very well put together family from you name the sitcom, and they're still gambling. And I just wonder, what does the group think about that? Like, I don't know. I'm putting that out there for thought.
So,
I like to say access,
Right.
access and enabling. You know, previously gambling was seen as a rich person's addiction. And our community went undetected because, juke joint throwing dice in the corner and stabbing somebody in the foot, that wasn't considered an addiction back then. And to Brother Lovejoy's point, we live in a country of greed. Nothing's ever enough. Ever. It's never enough. Parenting isn't enough. Standing up isn't enough. Having money isn't enough. Having a home isn't enough. Having Nikes versus a certain type of Nike isn't enough. Nothing's enough.
Well, I
And
guess
as
that's what
soon
I'm
as
trying
we
to.
have something that works well, we have to make it work better, even if it's not broken. So all these things, Mrs. Kelly, that our children have now that we didn't have the generation before, when you think about it, it all makes them, as Chef Jay said, sedimentary. They're in the house doing it.
So
Let's also,
Dr. Lawson.
I'm sorry, but let's also think about the things you talked about, your generation and the things that you had. Let's talk about the things that you didn't have. You didn't have predators stalking you from your pocket every minute of every day, meaning the structures, the businesses, the corporations, the engineered systems that exist through all of the things that we get from our telephones that target behaviors, right? That create addictions, that create dependencies. You all, that generation and most generations, I think, before maybe this last one, were free of constant bombardment from advertisings, from, again, this word, access to these technologies that make it very easy to fall into this space. Think about how many of us wake up or go to sleep with our telephones, right? That can be argued to be an addiction. We wake up, first thing we do is we grab our phone and we start scrolling. We may be on Reddit, we may be on Facebook, we may be on Twitter to see what is going on in the world. What have we missed? We look at it the last thing we do at night, right? So you didn't have that generation, your generation, and so many others didn't have industries, entire multi-billion-dollar industries targeting you to create these habits down the spectrum to addictions. And so while you had other activities, you had other things going on, you were doing this, doing that, you were busy and tired at the end of the day, you also didn't have the technology that these kids have, that this generation has. And it's not just youth. And I mean, we're talking about youth now, and I appreciate that because you and I represent youth development, a youth development organization. But we're talking about everybody, right? Mm-hmm. So that cannot be, I think, overstated enough, that there are entire multi-billion-dollar industries that survive off of small, regular, consistent bets, that survive off of ensuring that communities of color, especially, and others get hooked on. And it's incremental, right? Somebody, I think, talked about Roblox. You do this, you get that reward. You play Candy Crush, you get ping, 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 you get fake coins. It's still a, action, reaction. There's a reward center there, and it grooms you into more and more and more risky behaviors to where you're like, what Nakia was saying earlier, you're not able to pay for your household. So you all didn't have that, and that's important, I think, to state in this conversation in terms of what's going on.
Chef Jay,
in some ways, are we using gambling and addiction synonymously? So when does gambling become an addiction? And there seems to be some space in between those two events, right? There's some space in between pulling the lever to gamble, pressing the button to place a bet, and then it becoming an addiction. And so I'm asking that question. And is addiction without negative consequences a bad thing? There are certainly things that we are addicted to, but perhaps don't have the negative consequences. And so I'm kind of drilling down perhaps a little bit clinically on like how we're viewing gambling, right? Gambling is a problem because sometimes people can't stop, and sometimes people don't know not to bet the house. Um, how do we stop the casual gambler from becoming the addictive gambler? How, like, are we arguing that all gambling should stop? Are we arguing for clinical interventions? And if so, it sounds like we could be talking a little bit more precise about it, because I am interested in definitions and like modalities of this as well. So yeah, I
Well,
think it's a question for the clinicians.
let me just add this, and we're going to throw it to Dr. Rule and Nakia. Then I'm going to always go back to Mr. Lovejoy because his ideology is something I resonate with. And then we've got 7 minutes, and we want to talk about a little bit about can we prevent any of this? I asked before, is there an addictive gene in some people? Is that a real thing?
No.
Number one. And so with that in mind, Dr. Rule, speak.
So
or whatever what Chef Jay spoke about as well.
Right. So there is no addictive gene, right? So there are multiple genes that predispose people to become addicted, just like with alcohol or substance abuse or with obsessive compulsive disorder. But really what happens, it's really a system, and it's the exposure that people have that gets them to the point of addiction. So that's my first point. And my second point is that you're right, Chef Jay, it is along a spectrum. So there are things where you can gamble and it's okay, right? But my concern is really for youth, that because, as Dr. Lawson said, you now have AI in the background predicting our behaviors. They are targeting specifically how you respond, and then targeting people specifically to be sure you stay on that machine, you stay on the phone, you stay on the app, and you keep on betting and you keep on betting, and you really you can end up losing a whole lot. So it's not only about money. It's just that a lot of the youth are becoming distracted, and they're really just wasting time. And I'll take 30 seconds to say something, not to foreshadow what Brother Lovejoy said. And it really is about purpose. When I was in school, I learned about Black history. I learned about who we were, what we have become. I learned about the 500, 1,000 famous Black inventors, what they did. Every time I walked by a stoplight, I knew a Black person invented that. I don't think our youth understand who we are, value who we are, what we are, and that the system, we are in a system that is meant to get us to a place of we don't know ourselves. So that's why I think addiction is a problem. And I'll just stop there.
Brother Lovejoy. I think you're muted.
Yes, ma'am. I was saying, wow, this is getting better and better each time we come together. I thank Dr. Rule and all of our panelists. This is ever increasingly needed type of discussion in our community. I did place in our chat, sister, that some in most major religions, they generally view gambling with caution or prohibition of some sort due to the concerns over greed, addiction, and social harm. And I think if we take a look at those three, greed, addiction, and social harm, they really speak to a slippery slope, right? It's not necessarily inherent that gambling is wicked or wrong, if you will, but it leads somewhere. It it teases something in the human being, and for generations, right, and throughout cultures and throughout out continents, right, civilizations have kept an eye, if you will, on this issue of gambling because of these three major issues: greed, addiction, and then the larger social harm. And so, again, being Black History Month, I think we need to do what the Sankofa bird does, is to look back, or to go back, right, in order to go forward. There are definitely some things that we are missing in our community, some things that we're missing in our home, in our households, some things that we're missing as individuals. And because of the missing links, individuals are not coming together to be whole individuals. And so this is where we see that gap can be filled by addiction, whether that's food, smoking, gambling, whatever. We have to address that the human being today is not whole. Although we were poor coming up, the 30s, the 20s, straight up, we were poor. All right. And actually, my mother told me there was a difference between poor and po, right? We was po, okay? Poor is, I learned, is passing over opportunities repeatedly, right? And so today we have a poor-minded people. They pass over opportunities. It's right there, but we can't see it.
Lovejoy on fire tonight, man.
Brother Chef, man, I'm just saying that, we had some good stuff, and we need to go back to those things that culturally ground us.
Yeah.
Culturally ground us.
I
don't know about other communities, but I know that for our community, we need to be culturally grounded.
Can I just say for Black History Month, I would say as well, we have to keep in mind that the things that were for the white community, or the general overall American id, if you will, they were protected in a way. So when we talk about gambling, we have to understand that gambling in other communities had tax benefits, tax write-offs. You can go to the horse track or poker games and put winnings on your tax return. You can't do that with a craps game. No, you can't. There were definitely institutional built-in benefits that still undergirded and kind of took the edge off of gambling, if you will, in other communities, and that didn't really exist in the Black community. Kind of to speak on what Brother Lovejoy was saying, that there is a Black history and still a systemic racism type of edge to gambling in the Black community versus other communities that we can see all over the place. When we get in trouble in the African American community with this, traditionally, it was treated differently than if it was than in other in other environments and other communities. So I do want to make sure that we get that in there as well.
Right.
You can put poker winnings on your tax return. Can't do that with craps tables.
That's true. We've got a little less than a minute. Dr. Lawson.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we get this in here as well, and I won't take that long. Brother Lovejoy talked about recognizing what culturally grounds us. And so I'm worried about that us, right? Because which us are we talking about? And I'm not talking about them versus us, but in the context of the population group that our organization is most concerned with, youth, we have to be willing to understand, accept, and embrace the fact that cultural grounding, cultural specifics mean something different to youth today than they did for me, than they did for the generation before me and the generation before them. We have to make sure that we bring our whole selves to this problem if we're really looking to help solve it for young people. And that means allowing the young people to tell us what culture looks like. Because I would venture to say that it is completely different than what we think it looks like. So when we're talking about creating these interventions that have to do with who we are and what we are in cultural grounding, we have to make sure that we sit back a little bit and do a little less talking and a lot more listening, so that we can actually be a part of something that's actionable for the generations that we're trying to help, and not just being nostalgic about how things were in our day.
So that unfortunately is the last word, because we have hit our mark. It's 8:00. It's been a riveting conversation as usual. Thank you so much to the panelists. Thank you, Maurice, our architect of putting all this together. Thank you so much. And listen, if folks out there want to hear more, I'll contact everybody and say, let's come and do it another time. Let's do it one more time. But for this evening, thank you everyone for watching. Panelists, again, thank you so much. And everyone, have a good evening.
Have a good evening.
Good evening.